Hello and welcome back to creating a horror game from scratch. Last time we focused on creating our modular door system so we can have multiple doors, different frames, position them correctly, open them correctly, etc, etc. Today we're going to continue our modular doors by adding in a very basic keyring system so our main character can have different keys, and doors will respond appropriately by opening if we have the key and staying closed if we don't. It will be a pretty basic system to start. We'll get a little bit more complex later, but because we're starting with a basic system, we'll also look into event dispatchers and the purpose they serve, especially when it comes to things like doors and locks. All right, let's get started with something pretty basic. I'm gonna go ahead and open up the BP we made for our door here. And on the left-hand side, I'm gonna add a new variable, and we're simply going to call this locked. It'll be a Boolean, and it will be public like the other variables we've created. And this is going to do exactly what you would expect. It's going to be the check on whether or not the door can open because it's locked. So to do this, I think I'll do it up here at the top. I'm gonna create a new custom event, and I'm just going to do a lock check. This is a separate recording session. Sorry if there's a weird jump. All right, so let's continue with the lock check. In fact, I'm glad it's a new recording session. We're not gonna do it as a custom event. Let's go over here and let's make this a function. So over here by functions, we're gonna hit this little plus. The reason we're gonna do a function, I'll explain in a second, but I'm gonna go ahead and also name it lock check. Oh, I'm gonna have to compile and save because that's already taken by the custom event we created. But since it's deleted now, I should be able to do lock check, compile and save it, and now it's freed up. The first thing we're gonna do is very simple. We're going to grab locked, we're gonna get it, we're gonna hold B and click for the branch, plug in the execution pin, plug in our condition. However, what are we gonna do beyond this? Well, now we need to start looking at things like, well, does the player have the key to unlock it? Can this be unlocked? And what happens if it is unlocked? So to do this, we're gonna need to be able to communicate with the player in their inventory. So if you remember, we've already used an interface so we could communicate with objects that can be interactable. Let's do it for the player. Let's go to your BP folder. I'm gonna go to interfaces, and instead of interaction, I'm now going to create a new interface. So I'm gonna right click, go to blueprint, and I'm gonna do blueprint interface. And I'm gonna do BPI underscore player. So anything that is going to talk to the player, I'm gonna use the BPI player. I'll open that up. Once we're inside, I'm going to click up here on the new function. We're gonna press F2 to rename it. And I'm gonna call this key request. And we are going to require an input and an output. So the input, we're just going to make it some text. And we're gonna call this key ID. And the output will just be a success. If they have it, we'll mark this as true. If they don't have it, we'll mark it as false. So let's go ahead and hit compile and save. And in order for the player to be able to see that interface, we are gonna have to go to first person. We're gonna have to go to blueprints, BP first person character. And at the top here, we'll go to our class settings. And on the right-hand side, we need to implement our BPI player. Compile and save. So now that we are able to react to that request, let's go to the left-hand side, open up our interfaces, and you'll see that we now have key request. Let's double click on it so we can define what our character is going to do when they receive this request. Let's undo the execution pin. And like I said, we're going to do a very basic key inventory. At least I think I said that last recording session. If I didn't, that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to click a new variable here, and we're just going to call it keys. I'm going to make it just a bunch of text, and I'm going to right click this dot, and now it is an array of texts. I'm going to hit compile and save. So we received the request, and it includes the key ID. So we're going to take our keys here, we're going to do a get, and you'll see we have an array. Out of the array, we're going to do a for each loop, and we're going to plug in the execution pin. So for those that do not know, a for each loop is going to look at this array and say, for every item in the array, we need to do something. So in this example, on the loop body, so for every single element, what we need to do is say, does this element, so the current one we're looking at, equal, and we're going to do equal exactly, for the record, equal exactly basically just says it has to be case sensitive as well, so do keep that in mind. And in this case, does the array element equal the key ID? Now, you can plug this straight in just like that, and then add in some execution pins or reroute pins and make that look nice and fancy. Or if you're in a function, because it requires the input of key ID, we can actually just pull out of that and type in key ID, and we can just reference it here. And to me, it just looks a little bit more clean. So we're gonna need a branch, hold B and click. The loop body gets plugged into the branch, and then our Boolean pin gets put into our condition. So if the key ID does not equal the element, then it will run a false, so we don't want to plug anything in there. If this element does return the true on key ID, then we actually want to return or do a return node with success checked. Here is an interesting fact about for each loops. If it hits a return node, the for each loop will be terminated, which means that we do not need to do anything else for this to stop. Once it hits a true, it will stop. However, what happens if it never hits anything? Well, at the bottom of the for each loop, we have a completed. So once it looks through all of this, if it never hits this return node, then we know that it will go through the completed execution pin. So out of completed, I'm going to type in return. And instead of having success checked, we'll leave it as false. So if it finds it, return success. If it doesn't find it, return false. And we'll hit compile and save. If we head back to our door, you'll see, well, is the door locked? If it is locked, then we need to send a message to the player. So I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna do get player character. And out of the return value, I'm going to type in BPI, because remember, BPI is our naming convention. We can do BPI interact request, or we could do the key request. You'll see I have a naming inconsistency, so I'm going to go change that real quick. Basically, I'm just going into the key request. I'm hitting F2, going to the beginning, BPI, and just adding that on. So we have a consistent naming convention. So because I changed the name, you'll note here that I'm getting a warning. This is because we changed the function. So now it's saying we can't use this. In that case, just delete it. Again, do get key ID, and that should fix your warning if you were getting one. Anyway, with that all fixed, out of the get player character, we are going to pull out and type in BPI. Now that the naming convention is correct, we're going to do BPI key request. So we are going to send the player character a BPI key request if the door is locked. Now each door is going to have a unique key ID. So in order to make that happen, on the left-hand side, we are going to add a new variable, and we're going to name it key ID, go figure. By the way, if you are someone that can get very lost very easy in the data, I would change this, maybe just name it like door underscore key ID. It just makes it a little cleaner and easier to read. I caught myself there right as I was about to do it for you guys. But I'm gonna go ahead and open this up, make it a public variable, and switch it to a set of text and hit compile and save. Then we'll take the door key ID and we'll make that the condition that we're looking for, or the input for the key ID that we are requesting. And of course, now we can just hit B and click for a branch because it returns whether they have the key or not. So if they do have the key, we can just simply set locked to, actually, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to tell you why I'm not going to do this, because I think it's important, because I think what I just did makes sense at face value. The reason I'm not going to do this is because what if you have another reason to unlock the door besides a key? Well, your unlocking mechanism is now locked behind a key request. So let's go make this an individual event instead. Let's head back to the event graph, find some space, and I'm going to create a custom event, and it's just going to be unlock door. We will take locked and hit set. And we will make sure that that is set to false because it is going to be unlocked now. And we're also going to play sound at location. The asset I don't have any right now, but this is where you'll play the sound. The location, we will get the SM door. Out of SM door, I am going to get the world location. Oh, one sec, wrong one. It should look like this. And that return value will go into location. Now you can be more specific if you'd like. Like let's say you have a handle. You could be like SM door, then get the handle, then get the world location. That's perfectly fine. But for now, this is good for me. I will say, by the way, something you can do is on the variables, just say add and just do like unlock sound. Set the variable type to a sound cue, like this. Make it an object reference, public. Compile and save, and now you can have a different unlock sound per door, and you can just plug that in just like that. And this is why I wanted to separate the unlock from the key check. I hope that makes sense. I'm gonna go ahead and grab it, make a comment, and just say unlock door. So now we go back to the lock check, and we have a valid key ID. So what we're gonna do is we are going to now run the custom event unlock door just like that, and hit compile and save. So basically what we just did is, right now this will never run. We have nothing toggling this. So let's fix that. On the left-hand side, under interfaces, we have the interaction request. Right now, it just immediately toggles door. Well, we don't want that. What we want to do is delete toggle door, and instead on the BPI interact request, let's just immediately do a lock check. Now you might be wondering why this makes sense, and I'll show you. Let's hit compile and save, and return to our lock check. If the door isn't locked, we can just immediately toggle the door. Because in a way, every time you open a door, it needs to run a lock check if you think about it logistically. So there we go. And as of right now, we have no way to add a key to our keychain, even though it exists on the player. So let's go back to our interface where we created the BPI key request and add a function. This will be a BPI add key request. It will require an input of some text. That will, of course, be the key ID. And the output will, of course, be a Boolean on whether or not it was successful. Compile and save that. And now what we can do is in our BP first person character, we can go to the BPI add key request. And now what we're going to do is unplug that execution pin. We're going to grab our keys here. And now what we'll do is we'll pull out and we'll type in add unique. So the reason I'm adding unique instead of just adding is because let's say you have several of the same type of key. It would be redundant to make that list hold it twice. So there's really no reason to worry about that at this low level of an inventory system. And of course, we'll take the key ID and plug that straight in. So it's going to say, hey, if this is a unique key ID, add it to the ring, and then return that it was indeed successful. We'll hit compile and save. Skip forward if you like, but let's do a brief rundown. What did we do? Well, whenever the door gets interacted with, it goes through a lock check. The lock check basically says, hey, is the door locked? If yes, I want you to send the player a request to see if they have the key ID that is specified for this door. If they do, unlock the door. If they do not, don't do anything. However, if the door is unlocked, just go ahead and toggle the door. As for the player, they can now receive keys and they can respond to a key request by going through their keys, checking if it's there. If it is, we return a success. If it's not, we return a failure. Just to link it back, right here is the success I just talked about. True, unlock door, false, don't. I hope this is making sense because this is what happens when blueprints start communicating. But I think as long as you're following along, you should be able to keep up. Okay, so now let's make it, but actually before we continue, let's just double check. Let's go to our world here. I'm gonna click on my door and hit F. And right now the door is set to just be open. Let's go ahead and make sure it's not open. Let's set it to locked, and let's set the key ID to just like 001, something random like that, and we'll save. Now, if our system is working correctly, our player should never have any keys at the moment. So this shouldn't open. And there you go. It is saying, nope, I'm locked. I can't be opened. A reminder that the door does not have collision. Maybe we'll fix that at some point. But for now, just hit your door frame if you're following along. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do now is add a new blueprint to our actors. We're going to right click. We're going to go to blueprint class, actor. We're going to call this BP key. And we're going to open that up. Within BP key, what we're going to do is we're going to add a static mesh over here on the left-hand side in the components. We're going to call it SM key. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and make it something we can see. Like, I don't know. Can we get like a random sphere? Oh God, there's all kinds of them. Editor sphere? How big is it? It's not too big. That'll work. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a public variable that is going to be key ID, and it's going to be text public. I'm going to hit compile and save. And because this is going to be an item in the world, what we're going to need to do is make sure that it can be interacted with. So we're going to go to our class settings. We're going to go to our implemented interfaces. We're going to type in BPI, and we're going to click on interaction. Then on the left-hand side, we can define what happens when we receive that interaction request. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to send the player the key, and if it's successful, we can delete ourselves because the player now has the key. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, right-click, and get player character. Out of get player character, we are going to do a BPI add key request. Plug that in with the execution pin. We're going to take our unique key ID from our variables, and we're going to drag that in as our input for the key ID. And then it's as simple as plugging in the return node. Actually, no, we're not going to do that. Not yet. One sec. What we're going to do now is destroy actor like that. So that will get rid of this actor. And then we will return whether or not this was successful. I just realized how that makes no sense logistically. Here, I know how we can make this a little bit more bulletproof. I'm just going to undo this execution pin. I'm going to do a branch here, and we'll plug in this successful to it as well. So if it is successful, we can destroy this actor and return successful. There we go. Now it makes more sense. Now we'll hit compile and save. Now I'm running on hopes and dreams that that sphere I just used has collision, but if it doesn't, we will fix it. That is a big sphere. I didn't realize it was that big, but that's okay. So if you remember on our door on the right-hand side in our default, we set that key ID to 001. So let's go ahead and click on our key here and set its key ID to 001, just like that. And we'll hit play, and we'll pray that you have collision. Hell yeah. So we'll go ahead and look at our key and press our interaction. You'll see it disappeared. And now in our key inventory, we have 001, which means if it's done correctly, the first one should unlock the door. If it hit, I think it did. And then the second one should then go about actually toggling the door because it has now become unlocked. Now, I wanted to have a look here at one of the comments I got. I am not going to be able to say that name, but he said, nice one. Can you make a tutorial about, like, for example, player has to close 2 other doors before the third one can be opened? Well, if you remember at the beginning of this video, I specifically said we're going to talk about event dispatchers. So I will show you how to set up event dispatchers, and then your homework will be to try to use that information to set up that system. So I'm going to go back into my BP door. And we're going to create a bunch of events that we might need to use whenever we're developing our game. What do I mean specifically? Well, should I leave that in the video? I'm going to go ahead and add an event dispatcher on the left-hand side here, and we're going to call this one first open door. We're going to add another one. We're going to let first close door. We're going to add another one. We're going to do first unlock door, first lock door. Then we're just going to have open Then we're just gonna have open door. Oh, it's taken. We'll do ed open door, ed close door, ed lock door, ed unlock door. Okay, so what did I just do? I just made a whole bunch of event dispatchers of things that essentially could have events tied to them. Okay, let's break this down. Let's do the really easy ones first. If we opened the door for the first time, or not even the first time, let's just say we're opening the door. I'm gonna move this to the right a little bit because we want this to happen immediately and not after the door has been opened. We're going to call event dispatcher open door. We're going to specifically call it. We're going to plug that in like that. And then we're going to do the same thing for the door closing. So let's go ahead and do ed close door, and we're going to call it. What in the heck am I doing? Well, let's go ahead and hit compile and save, and I'll show you an example of what's going on here. Let's use our old interaction test cone here and change what it does slightly. When we interact with this cone, I don't want anything to happen. So I'm just going to delete that. And now the cone just exists. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our viewport here. And at the top, we're going to click on this little grid looking thing. And we're going to click on Open Level Blueprint. Now, this is where you can make a lot of really useful stuff using event dispatchers. Let's go ahead and make sure our cone is selected and go back to the level blueprint. And when I right click, you'll see that I can create a reference to that cone. So now here's the cone in our event graph for the map. Let's also grab the door and right click, and we're going to create a reference to the door. So let's pretend I want that cone to be deleted when that door opens. Well, one way we can do that without having to hard connect these two blueprints together is the level blueprint and level dispatchers. So on BP door, remember how we created ed open door, and whenever the door opens, it calls ed open door. Well, if you look, we have BP door here. If we pull out, we can actually bind event to ed open door. And you'll see we get this fancy box. Well, anytime you want to bind an event to something, unfortunately, you need an event to occur to actually have that binding take place. I know that can be kind of confusing, but we can use the event begin play. In order to pull that up, by the way, I just hit P and then clicked on the graph. Or you can just right click and type in begin play. So on event begin play, we're going to bind an event to BP door on open door. Sorry, I'm getting all tongue twisted. The event we want to have happen when this occurs, we're going to create another custom event. We're just going to call this delete the cone. So whenever event dispatcher open door happens, we're just going to simply delete actor with the target being the cone, like that. Now, I will admit, normally this exact set of logic would be flawed because if this gets deleted and then we open the door a bunch, it's going to be like, oh no, error, that doesn't exist. So that's just additional logic. But that's what the whole point of the event dispatcher is. We're not, these two BPs aren't hard connected, but because we can watch for these events, we can then make things happen. So watch what happens. First, we got to pick up our key because it's still locked. But then when I open this door, oh, there it goes. We had to unlock and then open. So the door opened, boom, cone's gone. Now, the reason this is important for horror games is, well, if you want a certain door to be linked to like a jump scare or the monster spawning or literally anything, maybe you need a puzzle in order to continue progression. That's why event dispatchers are so powerful. If we head back to our door really quick, I'm not going to go ahead and I'm not going to do all these because like you can see how to use these. I might add them later. But like, let's say we want first open door to occur. So like we need to call the first time the door opens, we need this to call, which by the way would be a perfect time to use the delete the cone, because then it's only going to occur the first time the door opens. However, how do we know if it's only the first time the door has been opened? We have to set a Boolean for that. So we're just going to do first open. We're going to set it as a Boolean. It does not need to be public because there's no reason to set that beforehand. And what we're going to do is we're going to move all this over. And we're going to run a branch. Plug in our execution pin. First open is going to be our condition. If it is first open, we are going to call first open door, which means we would also need to set first open to false, which by the way, by default, it's false. So go ahead and hit compile and save since it's a new variable. And then on first open on the left-hand side here, make sure the default value is true because by default, it will be true. So if it is the first open, call first open, set first open to false, then also call that the door is indeed opening in general. If it's not first open, just immediately call that the door is opening and bypass the first open event. And bam, now the door is set up to know also whenever it's opening for the first time, which means that if we needed something like this logic to make sense, instead of the event happening out every time the door opens, we could easily just do bind event first open. So now it'll only happen the first time it opens and we won't get that error anymore. We can hit compile and save. And just to show you that it works, we can hit F, unlock the door, open it, and it still works. So isolue 0 F1, I hope that's even remotely close. You said player has to close 2 other doors before the third can be opened. Well, if you made a custom door with 3 booleans and you used event dispatchers, you could keep track of which doors are open and which ones are closed. Report back to me on if you're able to figure it out. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.